Cuba is the largest Caribbean island populated with over 11 million people. Havana, the capital, is the most populated city and the epicenter for the diverse Cuban culture. Cuba derives its diverse culture from many different periods of inhabitants, rulers, and movements. After being occupied by numerous indigenous tribes, Christopher Columbus discovered Cuba in 1492. This led to Cuba being claimed and controlled by Spanish rule and remained a Spanish colony until the Spanish-American War of 1898. After that, Cuba became an independent country under a U.S. protection. Despite the U.S.'s continued attempt to impose democratic rule, a communist dictatorship arose under the rule of Fidel Castro in the early 1960s. This communist system was modeled after that of the USSR and introduced stringent cultural restrictions, including a lack of freedom of speech. These political controls had a great influence on contemporary art, as well as adding to the rich cultural history. However, in recent years, and under rule of Raul Castro, Fidel's brother, there is a growing trend to lifting restrictions, which bring a fresh rise of culture in the proud country of Cuba. There are two main influences on art in Cuba: religious and political. Religion is the most dominant force in the creation of Cuban art. Due to the vast Afro-Cuban culture, most art created comes from various African religions. One important Afro-Cuban artist is Manuel Mendive, who created art based on Santeria religion. Politics also play a huge role in the creation of Cuban art. Since the end of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, there have been many art movements to express the artist's need for freedom of speech and expression. Culture, especially art within a culture, carries a mark accustomed to the circumstances in which it is produced and where it is forced to construct a national identity in the face of oppressive governmental power. Most Cuban art is not contemporary. The nature of the Cuban culture is more expressive and creative, so most of the art comes from festivals, music, street art, and other non-traditional forms of expression. Traditional Cuban art has means of expressing ideas rather than subjects. This became a trend in Cuban painting during the 1970s and 1980s. The object is to allow a person to create his or her own meaning rather than to be told by the artist what it was intended to mean. For example, in a piece from the 80s by artist Florencio Soto called Immediately Geographic, a sculpture in the shape of Cuba but is shattered into many pieces. Some had interpreted this as a representation of the unequal treatment the artist encountered, and some interpret it as a feeling alone to the isolated nature of the island. The inspiration to contemporary art comes from the mixed cultures that Cuba has, including African, Southern American, European, and North American. Spirituality, politics, and innovation mold the inspiration for contemporary art in Cuba. All art in Cuba seems to express a positive and progressive feeling. Due to Cuba's financial and political situation, not all artists are able to access the top-of-the-line materials. This can cause paintings or sculptures to be very delicate and require a lot of upkeep, also making them unique and one of a kind. Street art is a huge source of identity and heritage for Cubans. Murals remind Cubans of their rough past but also provide an optimistic view of the future. Since there are no billboards, murals with political subject matter are often commissioned by organizations such as the Committee for Defense of the Revolution or the Young Communist League. Murals also often have religious subject and are painted with vibrant colors. Amal Alley is one of the famous locations for murals. Often there will be music and dancing in front of the murals on Sunday mornings and afternoons. One famous recurring image in the murals is that of Che Guevara, a famous Marxist revolutionary. Traditional Cuban clothing has Latin and African influences. Traditional female garb includes tiered ruffled skirts, exaggerated sleeves, brightly colored embroidery shirts, and head wraps. For men, the Havana or cigar shirt, with 2 pockets on the front and pleats in the back, is considered traditional. One famous artist from Cuba was Belkis Ayan Manzo. She was a Cuban painter and lithographer from Havana, Cuba. According to Dictionary.com, lithography is the process of printing from a flat surface, treated so as to repel the ink except where it is required for printing. Her work had many African influences and also seemed to reflect her personal issues as well. Her rise to fame was during Cuba's post-Soviet economic crisis, and therefore did not have all the materials an artist of her caliber would need, so she invented them herself. She took her own life at the age of 32 in 1999. Another famous artist was Waldo Diaz-Balart. He is a Cuban painter who currently lives in Madrid. He was born in 1931 in Baines, Cuba, and studied art at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. His passions include exploring color and light in geometric paintings and light sculptures. He currently works as an art lecturer, traveling all around the country giving talks about his work and findings. A fun fact about Pilar is that his sister, Mirta, was Fidel Castro's first wife. Cuban art has a large history behind it, is influenced by many different aspects, and is all around a reflection of the Cuban culture as a whole.